believed that a single plate of leftover fish could save a life and even change the fate of an entire village.
Come closer.
The truth
Thank you.
is, in a small fishing town, an old man once mocked as feeding ghosts was actually planting the seed for a miracle. After more than a decade studying human stories, I've learned that the smallest gestures often lead to the biggest turning points. In this story, you'll see how a humble meal saved a starving child, how that child returned years later as a successful man to repay his debt, and how one simple act of kindness turned shame into honor. When the man knelt before his old benefactor, right in front of those who had mocked him, the village realized the power of generosity. If you skip this, you might keep overlooking the impact of small daily kindness. But if you stay for just 1 minute, you'll never look at small acts the same way again. The river breathed out a smell of salt and dusk as the sun slid lower, gilding the thatched roofs of Morobe in a blaze of orange. The village was alive with noise, nets slapping against wooden hulls, women calling children home, gulls circling overhead with their harsh, hungry cries. Men bent beneath baskets heavy with fish, their shadows stretching long across the packed earth. But at the far edge of the lane, where the houses leaned as if tired of standing, an old man moved against the tide of noise. His back was bent, his hair silver, his hands calloused from a lifetime of wrestling with the river. He carried not a bounty, not laughter, but a single chipped plate with a modest serving of fish, cooked and cooled, set with the same care one might offer a guest of honor. Kwame placed it before the sagging steps of his home. He did it without hesitation, without flourish, as though repeating a ritual older than himself. Around him the air thickened with whispers. The women fetching water slowed to watch. A boy pointed, tugged at his mother's sleeve. "There he goes again," someone murmured. Another voice, sharper, carried. "He's feeding spirits. Mark my words, he's calling the dead to his door." Laughter followed, but uneasy, as if mocking could keep the shadows at bay. The plate sat there, small and fragile against the creeping dark. Kwame did not explain, nor meet their eyes. He simply stepped back, folding his hands behind him, gaze fixed not on the food, but on the horizon where the last light bled into the water. To anyone else it looked like madness. To him it was memory. He had no family to share a meal with, no wife to scold him for forgetting salt, no child to chase him with questions. Only this plate, offered each evening to the invisible. Inside his chest, a cough rattled, then passed. He turned, limped to his stool, and waited. The night came on fast. Shadows pooled in the alleys. Lamps flickered alive one by one. The voices of the village receded until only the drone of insects and the river's murmur filled the air. And then, faint as breath, a rustle by the steps. At first, only silence. Then a figure slid into the edge of light, small, ragged, with hair tangled like river weeds. The child's clothes were torn, feet bare and caked with mud. No one had seen this one before, not in the lanes of Morobe, not at the market. A stranger, yet not. The child crouched low, eyes darting, hands trembling as they reached for the plate. They ate fast, greed disguised as caution, glancing toward the door as if expecting a shout, a hand to strike. But Kwame said nothing. He only watched from within, heart thumping, breath shallow. When the last scrap was gone, the child licked their fingers, set the plate down with surprising care, and rose. Without a word, they slipped back into the night, swallowed by shadows. By the time Kwame pushed himself to his feet and stepped to the door, the lane was empty. Only the echoes of footsteps, or perhaps the pulse of his own ears remained. For nights after, the ritual repeated. Kwame prepared fish with the same diligence, placed it in the same spot, and retreated. Sometimes the child came early, sometimes late, sometimes not at all. The villagers kept whispering, some bold enough to jeer. "You see, he's a fool feeding ghosts. He's too old, too lonely. He's lost his mind." Yet still Kwame waited, his eyes always drawn to the steps when darkness fell. One evening, sensing lateness, he wrapped a small piece of dried fish in cloth, tucking it into his pocket. If the child came after the plate was gone, there would still be something. He told himself it was precaution, but it was hope, a hope stubborn as roots clinging to riverbanks. The village never learned the truth of those footsteps. They saw only a man growing thinner, lonelier, yet still obedient to a ritual none understood. Even when a stray dog once slunk near and left teeth marks on the fish, he didn't curse or give up. He simply lifted the plate, trembling, whispering, "I will wait for you." And then it happened. On a night when the moon cast silver on the river, the child lifted their head. For the first time, eyes met eyes. They were wide, dark, filled with something raw, fear, hunger, longing, all tangled together. The old man's breath caught, words rising and failing in his throat. Then, soft and quick as a sigh, the child spoke. "Thank you." Just that. 2 words, fragile yet heavy as stone. Before Kwame could step forward, the figure vanished into the shadows, swallowed whole. He stumbled to the steps, staring at the place where the plate had rested, where the child had crouched. Nothing remained but emptiness, and the faint warmth of a voice that still lingered in the air. From that night on, the plate stayed untouched. The child did not return. Days passed, weeks. The fish grew cold beneath the stars until flies claimed it. Kwame kept placing it anyway, each motion heavier than the last, his heart aching with absence. He searched the alleys, scanned the riverbanks, but found no trace. The village went on with its laughter and trade, but for him, the silence deepened. He would sit on his stool, gaze fixed on the step, waiting for a shadow that never came. That single "thank you" burned in his memory, sweet and bitter at once. Was it farewell? Was it promise? Or was it nothing more than a breath carried away by the night? He clutched the memory like the dried fish still hidden in cloth, uneaten, saved for someone who might never return. His eyes glistened when he touched it. The river whispered, the wind shifted, and still he waited. And so the question remained, pressing down with the weight of every empty evening. Who was that child? And why had they vanished after speaking the only word that could pierce a lifetime of solitude? The night wind carried a chill that seeped into every crack of Kwame's frail house, yet he still moved with the same slow, deliberate rhythm, lifting the plate with his weathered hands. His cough scraped his throat, but he did not falter. Outside, under the dying light, he set the food down where the dirt steps met the lane. The fish gleamed faintly, skin blistered from the pan, the scent of oil and smoke rising into the dark. He stepped back as always, a shadow watching from his stool, his eyes fixed on the plate as if the entire weight of his life rested upon it. Behind him, voices stirred. A group of villagers had gathered, their arms full of nets and baskets. Their laughter was sharp, cutting the quiet like knives. A young woman, no older than 20, broke from the cluster. She stood with her hands on her hips, eyes bright with both mischief and contempt. "Old man," she called, her tone mocking but edged with curiosity. "Which ghost are you feeding this time?" Kwame turned his head slowly. His gaze did not rise to meet hers, only brushed past her and returned to the plate. He said nothing. His silence drew more laughter, a ripple of ridicule that spread through the group. The woman clicked her tongue, shook her head, and walked away. The others followed, their mutters drifting back. "He's gone mad." A fool clinging to shadows. Kwame did not move. He waited as the sun bled out of the horizon, the plate glowing pale in the fading light. His chest ached, but the ache was familiar, almost welcome. Waiting was all he had left. Hours passed. The village settled. Lamps winked out one by one until the night pressed in heavy and black. The plate remained untouched. No rustle of bare feet, no small figure crouching in hunger. Only the hiss of crickets and the deep breath of the river. Still, Kwame stayed, body stiff, eyes aching with strain. And then faintly a sound, a scuffle near the steps. He leaned forward, hope surging fragile and sharp. He thought he saw movement, a shift of shadow, but when his vision cleared, the plate was gone. He shuffled quickly, knees shaking, and bent over the empty spot. At first, joy flared, but then his fingers touched the ground. The earth was damp, smeared. A faint print of teeth marked the scrap of bone left behind. The smell rose sharp and sour. Dog. The plate was licked clean, but not by the small, silent guest he had come to expect. His shoulders slumped, his throat tightened. He picked up the plate, still warm from the creature's tongue, and held it against his chest. The world tilted. On the edge of the lane, a sound broke the night, barking high and distant, carried on the wind. He froze, listening. The bark echoed, then faded, replaced by the faint squelch of mud. He peered closer and saw them, shallow footprints pressed into the dirt near the steps. Not the paw marks of a dog. Small, narrow, human. His heart kicked against his ribs. He could not tell if those prints were fresh or old, real or imagined, but the sight of them carved deep into his chest. He sank down on the step, the empty plate in his lap, and whispered into the dark, "I will still wait, even if you never come." His voice cracked, nearly lost in the night. "I will wait." The days turned heavy. Each evening he set the plate down. Each morning he lifted it again, sometimes emptied, sometimes untouched, always with trembling hands. The villagers grew bolder in their scorn. Children whispered that he had bargained with spirits. Men scoffed that loneliness had driven him mad. Women crossed themselves when they passed his door. Yet the old man carried on, stubborn as the river carving its way to the sea. Every scrape of bone against the pan, every step to the threshold, was an act of defiance against despair. He knew it was foolish, but he could not stop. One night, rain threatened, but did not fall. The air hung heavy with moisture, the smell of mud rising even before the first drop. Kwame set the plate down, straightened, and swayed slightly from the weakness in his chest. The cough returned, ripping through him until he bent double, his palms pressed to his knees. When it passed, he lifted his head, eyes blurred with tears, and saw the plate gleam wet under the lantern's glow. He sat again, gripping his knees. Time stretched. The village was silent. His ears strained for the sound of small feet, the whisper of breath. Only silence came. Then from far off, the bark again, closer this time. His heart rose. The barking echoed, overlapping with a softer noise. the squelch of wet earth disturbed by steps too light for a dog. But when the darkness shifted near the plate, it was the lean body of a stray, ribs showing, tongue hanging. It lunged, teeth flashing, and tore at the fish with savage hunger. The old man's breath caught. He lurched forward, a cry rising, but froze. The dog snarled over its prize, devouring it in frantic gulps. Kwame staggered back. His chest burned. The hope he had nursed cracked wide open. His hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the plate. He picked it up when the dog was gone, holding it as if it were the last fragile thing he owned. He sat in the doorway long after, rain finally beginning to fall, soft and relentless. Water darkened the earth, washed over the footprints, blurred what had been clear into nothing. He stared until the marks vanished, until only mud remained. A shiver ran through him, and for the first time he felt the weight of doubt heavier than the river itself. Perhaps he truly was mad. Perhaps there was never a child, only hunger in the form of beasts, only loneliness feeding his eyes with shadows. The thought sank into him, cold and merciless. He whispered again, this time not with hope, but with trembling desperation. Still, I will wait. His voice was nearly lost under the patter of rain. He clutched the plate to his chest, rocking slightly, as though the gesture itself could summon back what was gone. Inside the house, the air was damp, heavy with the smell of old nets and smoke. His hands worked automatically, scrubbing the plate clean, setting it on the table, drying it with cloth. Each movement was ritual, a tether to meaning in a world that had grown slippery. But when he lay down, the question haunted him, gnawing as fiercely as the stray dog had. Those prints in the mud, too small for pause, too precise for chance. Were they real? Did someone else wait in the shadows, watching, deciding? Or had his weary eyes deceived him once again? The rain poured harder, drumming on the roof, drowning the silence. He shut his eyes, but the image would not leave him. A plate carried off by teeth, a child's footprints washed away, and the cruel uncertainty of which was truth. The night pressed in, unforgiving. Kwame's breath rattled as he whispered to the dark, "How long can I keep waiting?" His words trembled, unanswered, leaving only the sound of rain and the vast emptiness that spread before him, like a sea with no shore. The market roared before dawn, lanterns swinging in the damp morning air, smoke rising from oil fires, gulls screaming overhead as if they too were haggling for scraps. The clamor of voices tangled with the metallic clash of knives, gutting fish, the stench of brine, blood, and sweat thick enough to cling to skin. Kwame bent low, shuffled toward the edge where his meager basket sat. His catch was thin, bones showing beneath scales, eyes clouded, the kind of fish most buyers ignored. He lowered the basket with care, hands shaking not from age alone, but from the weight of shame pressing into him like the tide. The main aisle of Marobi's market pulsed with new energy. At its center, a figure commanded all eyes. Jalani, tall and striking in a tailored shirt, brighter than the morning sky, strode between stalls as though he owned them. Gold glinted at his wrists. He carried himself not like a fisherman hardened by the river, but like someone who had never touched a net in his life. Behind him, porters dragged crates of goods from faraway towns, spices wrapped in silk, jars of palm oil gleaming in the light, fabrics that shimmered like captured sunlight. His voice rang out smooth as honey yet sharp with command. He greeted the market's elder with a firm handshake and slid something small into the man's palm. The elder's eyes darted around before closing over the gift, Moments later, Yalani was at the head of the docks, issuing orders. Boats were turned away, nets redirected. By midday, it was known to all. Only Jalani's boats would rest at the central pier. Everyone else would be pushed to the far, muddy bank where the water was shallow and the customers few. Quam's boat, once moored close enough for easy trade, now lay stranded in sludge. Each step toward shore left his legs aching, his lungs fighting for breath. The crowd flowed where the light and laughter were. Jalani's stall, laden with fish larger, shinier, fresher, or so his words claimed. Kwame laid out his small fish on woven matting. They looked pitiful beside the extravagance a few stalls down. He tried to straighten, to meet the eyes of passers-by, but most did not look at him at all. He sat in silence, the smell of rotting scales from yesterday's unsold catch clinging to his basket. Then Jalani approached. The crowd followed, eager for spectacle. He plucked one of Kwame's fish from the mat, held it up between two fingers as if pinching filth. His smile widened, teeth flashing. "Look here," he said, his voice carrying. "Even the cats in my yard would starve before touching this." Laughter erupted. The fish dangled, thin body flopping uselessly, before Jalani tossed it back at Kwame's feet. The old man's hand shook. His throat worked, but no sound came. He bent to gather the fish, pressing it back onto the mat with gentle fingers as if to protect it from further humiliation. The laughter rolled louder. Yalani basked in it, lifting his arms as though claiming victory in a contest no one else had entered. Kwame did not speak. He sat, his back curved like a bow, drawn too long, his silence heavier than any insult. The crowd, seeing no resistance, lost interest and drifted away, leaving only the echo of their laughter and the smear of shame across the stall. Later, when the sun lowered, the market thinned. Kwame gathered his unsold fish, tied them in cloth, and began the long walk to the far dock. His legs dragged. Each step sank into mud. The boat rocked weakly when he reached it, wood groaning with age. He heaved the basket aboard, the weight too light for a fisherman's pride, too heavy for an old man's body. He sat in the stern staring at the water. It no longer shone silver as in his youth. Now it seemed dark, thick, endless. His reflection looked back at him, hollow-eyed, hair clinging to his temples, shoulders stooped. A cough rattled from his chest. He pressed his hand against his ribs until the fit passed. The river lapped at the boat, a sound both soothing and cruel. He thought of the plate left each night on his doorstep, the ritual that bound him to hope. And yet here, in daylight, the world mocked him not with silence, but with laughter. He was a relic, tolerated but ridiculed, living proof that kindness brought nothing but scorn. He looked at his hands, skin toughened into maps of rivers and scars. He remembered holding nets strong enough to pull men overboard. Now those same hands trembled gathering fish that others dismissed. He felt smaller than the boat itself, swallowed by water and sky. But even as despair pressed close, something flickered at the edge of his mind. The faint prints in mud, the echo of soft steps. Were they real? Was there still a reason to wait? A gull shrieked above, swooping low, snapping at the scraps in his basket. He waved it off weakly, muttering under his breath, "This is mine, hard-earned, even if no one wants it." His voice cracked, the words dissolving into the river air. At the pier behind him, laughter swelled again. Jalani's stall still alive with noise, torches flickering like flames of conquest. The people leaned into the light, leaving Kwame in the dark edges. He gripped the oar, pushed the boat out. The water welcomed him, but not kindly. Each pull was agony, each breath short. Yet he kept going, the far bank drawing him in, mud awaiting, silence heavy. The market's laughter lingered in his ears, long after it faded behind him. When he reached the shallows, the boat scraped bottom. He stepped into sludge up to his ankles, dragged the vessel closer, his back bent nearly double. His lungs burned, but he did not cry out. He simply lowered his head and kept moving until the boat rested on solid ground. There he stood, chest heaving, staring at the dark water. The world seemed vast, uncaring. The injustice pressed against him like the weight of the river itself. His basket was nearly empty, his hands raw, his dignity bruised beyond words. And yet, beneath it all, his heart whispered the same question it had whispered every night. How long could he endure? Could he carry on waiting, not only for the child who may or may not exist, but for the day when his labor was not mocked, when his existence was not scorned? The last light drained from the sky. His silhouette leaned forward over the boat, small against the expanse of water. Behind him, the market torches flickered like cruel stars. Ahead of him, only darkness. His breath came in shallow gasps. He lowered himself onto the boat, back to the world, eyes to the water. The river gave nothing, yet he had no choice but to keep casting, keep waiting. The night closed in, heavy, final. The sound of laughter drifted faintly across the water, then faded. Only the river's endless voice remained, and the old man's silence pressed deep into the dark. The wind tore down the river that evening with the sharpness of broken glass. Nets snapped on the boats, doors creaked on their hinges, and the old houses seemed to groan as if the storm pressed on their very bones. Kwame leaned against the door frame, his chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. The cough had been clawing deeper, and tonight it rattled so fiercely that he felt the world sway with every spasm. His basket lay beside him, nearly empty, fish no larger than a hand, dull-eyed and thin. He had not eaten much himself. Still, he carried the plate as he always did, set it carefully on the step outside, the steam curling into the cold air. His fingers lingered on the edge of the dish, as if reluctant to let go. The night closed over the village quickly, swallowing color and warmth. The storm did not bring rain, only wind, howling between the houses, slamming shutters. In that noise, the plate seemed pitiful, absurd, a fragile offering against the chaos of the world. His neighbors glanced through narrow slits of their doors, shaking their heads at the old man's persistence. Some whispered that death itself must be the guest he waited for. Kwame coughed again, bent low, clutching his ribs. When he straightened, his vision swam, yet he forced himself onto the stool, his eyes fixed stubbornly on the plate. He whispered under his breath, words carried away by the gale. If you come tonight." The rest broke into a wheeze. The storm shrieked. Hours passed. The plate remained untouched. No figure crouched, no shadow stirred. At dawn, pale and sharp, he dragged himself to the step. The fish lay cold, its flesh stiff, the smell already souring. He lifted the dish in both hands, staring at it with a hollow ache. For the first time in years, he did not feel the steady pull of hope, only emptiness. He carried the plate down to the riverbank. The wind had calmed, leaving the water restless but not violent. He stood there a long moment, trembling, lips pressed tight. His eyes burned, though no tears fell. At last he lifted the plate high and let it drop. The splash was small, swallowed almost instantly by the current. The fish spun once, then was gone, carried beneath the rippling surface. The plate sank without trace, bubbles rising like ghosts. He stared until the water smoothed itself again, as if it had devoured not only the offering but also the man's faith. The villagers saw him return empty-handed. His face looked carved from stone. He did not place another plate that night. The door remained bare, the step cold. For those who had laughed at him, this was proof enough. The ritual had broken. His madness ended. Yet no one spoke of triumph, for something in his silence unsettled even the cruelest tongues. Inside, the house was darker than ever. The lamp sputtered, casting more smoke than light. Kwame sat by the cold hearth, staring at his hands, the lines etched deep as riverbeds. He thought of the child who had once crouched there, eyes wide, voice small, but unforgettable. "Thank you." The word echoed still, though it seemed now more like farewell than blessing. He pressed his palms together, as if to hold that sound in his skin, but all he felt was the roughness of callous and the tremor of age. He rose once in the night, stepping outside. The air was cold, the stars scattered faint. He stood where the plate used to rest. The dirt was bare, the threshold empty. For the first time, he imagined it would remain that way forever. He closed his eyes, the breath leaving him slow, shallow. "Perhaps I was a fool," he whispered. The wind offered no answer. The next day he worked the river, though his body screamed for rest. His net dragged heavy, but when he pulled it in, it held only weeds and a single small fish. He stared at it, scales dull, gills sluggish. He thought of setting it aside, of cooking it, of placing it on the step once more. His hand moved toward the basket, then stopped. He lifted the fish high, and with a grunt, flung it back into the river. It disappeared in a flick of tail, leaving only ripples. He sagged in the boat, drained. Evening came. The house sat bare. No plate waited outside. Inside, he lay on his mat, staring at the ceiling beams warped with age. His breath whistled faintly. He thought of the empty riverbank, the vanished plate, the silence of nights without footsteps. He thought of his own bones, brittle as driftwood, and as dusk deepened, his heart wrestled between despair and duty. He tried to imagine tomorrow, another day of nets, another night of waiting, but he could not summon the strength. The image of the river swallowing the plate would not leave him. It played again and again, relentless, final. Somewhere in the dark, a dog barked. His eyes flicked to the door, the faint sound stirring him. For a brief, fragile second, his heart lifted. But no shadow followed, no step on the dirt. Only silence returned. His chest sank again, heavy as stone. He turned his face away from the door, closed his eyes. The thought pressed against him like the weight of the tide. Perhaps kindness was nothing more than a stone dropped into water, sinking fast, leaving only circles that fade. The wind shifted. The river moaned. His cough tore through the room, long and raw, leaving him gasping. When it passed, he lay still, chest rising shallow. The night loomed around him, thick and merciless. And in that darkness, the question rose, sharper than ever, carving its way through his silence. Had his years of waiting been nothing but madness? And was his fragile kindness now lost to the river forever? The market froze as the roar of an engine shattered the noon heat. Children dropped their playthings. Men carrying baskets stopped mid-step. Women shielding their faces from the sun turned as one. A black car, its paint gleaming like a beetle's shell, slid into the dusty square. No one in Morobe had ever seen a machine like it, not even the elders who had lived through floods and famine. The air rippled with gasps, murmurs, and the sharp thrill of fear. The door opened with a hiss. Out stepped a man in a tailored suit, dark and sleek, his shoes sinking into the dirt as if the ground itself struggled to claim him. His name was Malik, though the villagers did not know it yet. He carried nothing of nets or salt or sweat. Instead, he cradled a bundle wrapped in pale silk. The fabric shimmered, a shocking sight in the dust-choked air. The crowd pressed closer, craning necks. The bundle was small, no larger than a man's hand. When Malik peeled back the folds, the sun caught it, a dried fish, preserved with careful hands, edges curled but intact. He lifted it as if it were a relic, his expression solemn. The market hushed, even the gulls falling silent as though the river itself leaned closer. "Is there anyone here," Malik said, his voice carrying clear and steady, "who remembers a man named Kwame?" The word struck the square like stones in water. Some frowned, confused. Others whispered, the name tasting strange on their tongues. At the far stalls, where laughter often rose at the expense of the old fisherman, silence held. One of the women selling fish touched her mouth, her eyes widening. She leaned to her neighbor, whispering in a tone both awed and fearful, "If that's who I think it is, if that boy truly returned." Her words trailed off, lost in the hum of the crowd. Malik's gaze swept the faces. He held the dried fish higher, his hands steady, his suit catching the sun. To the villagers, it looked like wealth had come to stand in judgment, carrying not gold or coins, but a token of the river, fragile yet enduring. Whispers rippled. Some remembered the plate on the doorstep, the rumors of spirits fed each night. Some recalled the child they thought they glimpsed, crouched in shadows. Could it be? Could the ragged figure they had dismissed, mocked, and forgotten stand before them now as this man in silk? Children stared with wide eyes, clutching their mothers' skirts. Men shifted uneasily, glancing toward the far end of the market where Kwame's stall once stood. The air thickened with questions, unspoken but pounding in every chest. Malik lowered the silk bundle slightly, his eyes narrowing as if the weight of memory pressed on him. The car behind him gleamed, out of place among the thatched stalls and hanging nets. Dust swirled, settling on his polished shoes, but he did not brush it away. He stood rooted, waiting for someone to answer. No one did, not yet. The market was too still, too shaken. The dried fish glinted in the sunlight, a strange beacon. The silence stretched, so complete that the villagers could hear the faint creak of boats at the pier, the buzz of a fly hovering over the stalls. In that silence, unease turned to awe. The question Malik had cast lingered, heavy and alive. Who here still remembered Kwame, and what story tied him to this man who carried a dried fish as if it were treasure? The car engine ticked softly as it cooled. Malik's shadow stretched long across the ground. The villagers stood suspended between past and present, between disbelief and revelation. The market, once loud with bargaining and mockery, now felt like a courtroom, waiting for judgment to fall. And in the stillness, one thought echoed through them all, sharp as a bell. If the boy had indeed returned, what would that mean for the old man they had called mad, and for every cruel laugh they had cast against him? The house leaned like a broken rib against the riverbank. Boards warped, roof sagging under years of salt wind. Kwame sat hunched inside, his back to the failing light. when footsteps disturbed the silence. They were not the hesitant scuffs of children, nor the cruel swagger of villagers come to mock him. These were firm, measured, deliberate. The doorframe filled with a figure taller than the space seemed to allow, dressed in dark cloth that caught the evening glow. In his hands, wrapped in pale silk, gleamed the dried fish that had silenced the market hours before. "Kwame," the man said softly. His voice was not the command of a stranger, but something older, intimate, as if spoken through layers of memory. The old man blinked, his eyes rheumy but sharp enough to trace the shape before him. His breath faltered. His hands gripped the chair's arms until his knuckles whitened. "Who are you to speak my name here?" His voice cracked, but carried steel. The man stepped closer, lowering to his knees on the dirt floor. He unwrapped the silk with slow reverence. The dried fish rested in his palms, fragile but preserved, its edges curled like paper. He extended it upward. "You gave this to me," he whispered, "when I had nothing, when I was no one. I have carried it with me all my life." Quam's chest rose, then caved. The world tilted, his eyes locked on the relic, his mind racing back through years of silence, laughter, waiting. The plate on the doorstep, the small figure crouched in the dark, the voice that once whispered thank you. His lips trembled. "No," he breathed, as if afraid the truth might break him. "No, it cannot." The man bowed his head. "It is me. I was that child." The word struck like a bell. For a long moment the air between them was thick, vibrating with the impossible. Then Kwame's hands, trembling like leaves in wind, reached out. His fingers brushed the dried scales. The texture was sharp, real. His vision blurred. He did not weep loudly, but his breath shuddered. His shoulders bent as though a hidden weight had finally cracked him open. The man lifted his head, his eyes bright though his face was steady. "I left with nothing but that gift. I survived because of it. I built a life, a name, but I never forgot the night someone fed me when no one else would. I never forgot you." The silence inside the house thickened, the river outside whispering against its banks. Kwame drew the fish to his chest, clutching it as if it were a heartbeat. "All these years," he said, his voice breaking like surf. "I thought I was a fool. I thought the river had swallowed my kindness." Malik's hands hovered near the old man's shoulders, hesitant to touch, as though he feared to disturb something sacred. "You were never a fool. You saved me. That night, you gave me more than food. You gave me a reason to believe I was worth saving." The old man looked into his face, searching for traces of the boy he once glimpsed. And there, in the sharp jaw, in the eyes that did not flinch, he saw it. A shadow of hunger turned into strength. He let out a sound between a laugh and a sob, collapsing inward as if every year of loneliness released at once. He pressed the dried fish back into Malik's hands. "It belonged to you all along. You were the one waiting, not me." Malik shook his head, his eyes burning. "No, it was always you. You waited, and in that waiting you carried me with you. Tonight I return it so you will know you were never alone." The lamp flickered, shadows crawling across the cracked walls. In that dimness, two lives converged, the forgotten fisherman and the man who had risen from nothing. The relic between them glowed faintly, less fish than symbol, less meal than covenant. Kwame bent forward, his forehead nearly touching Malik's hand. His tears fell silently onto the silk. His chest heaved, but this time the sound was not despair, but release. "Then I am not mad," he whispered, more to himself than to the man before him. "No," Malik said firmly. "You are the reason I am alive." Outside, the night deepened, the village settling into restless sleep. But inside that broken house, the river's whispers grew louder, wrapping around them like a hymn. Kwame lifted his head, eyes glistening, voice frail yet fierce. "If you have returned, then the waiting was not in vain. But tell me, what now? What will you do with this life you have carried from my doorstep?" The question lingered, trembling in the shadows. Malik looked down at the dried fish, then back at the old man whose kindness had defied ridicule, hunger, and time. He did not answer yet. The silence itself was heavy with promise, with the weight of choices yet to unfold, and in that silence, Kwame's heart beat with a strange, fragile hope. For the first time in years, he dared to believe that tomorrow might hold more than waiting. The hammering of nails rang out before sunrise, echoing through the narrow lanes of Nairobi like the beat of a new drum. Villagers crept from their homes, blinking in disbelief as they saw strangers carrying beams of timber, buckets of lime, rolls of tin. At the center of it all was Malek, sleeves rolled back, his polished shoes set aside. He knelt in the dirt beside Kwame's sagging house, pressing his palm against the rotted planks, as if measuring the heart of the old dwelling. Then he rose and gave instructions in a voice that carried calm authority. Work began in earnest, wood splitting, saws singing, the air alive with change. By midday, the crooked walls had been torn down, leaving open sky where decay once stood. A new frame rose, sharp and clean, sunlight striking it like promise. Nets were strung along the beams to dry, not as relics but as living tools, reminders of labor. Beside the construction, another surprise gleamed. A boat, fresh painted, tied at the pier, rocking as if eager to meet the water. Kwame sat on a stool watching it all, his breath shallow, eyes wide as though afraid the vision might dissolve. "Why do you do this?" he asked at last, his voice a brittle reed in the noise of hammers. Malik paused, wiping sweat from his brow. He turned, gaze steady. "Because you fed me when the world turned its back. This isn't charity. It's memory made solid," the villagers whispered among themselves. Some admired the sight, others eyed Malik with suspicion. But curiosity outweighed doubt. They began drifting toward the house, first in twos, then in clusters, until the lane thrummed with bodies. For the first time in years, Kwame's name was spoken not with scorn, but with reverence. An old woman bent low before him, laying a woven mat at his feet. "Forgive us," she murmured. "We mocked what we did not understand." One by one, others followed. Gifts of fruit, bundles of herbs, jars of oil. Children who once threw stones now stood silently, their hands clasped behind them, their eyes wide with something like respect. The air was thick with a shift no one could deny, the tide of shame turning toward honor, but not everyone bowed. At the edge of the gathering, Jalani appeared, dressed sharp as ever, his smile tight. He clapped slowly, mock applause cutting through the murmurs. "Impressive," he said. "A fine show. But surely, Malik, a man of your stature doesn't waste his time with broken boats and withered old fishermen. There are real profits to be made in Nairobi. Join me. Together we could control not only the pier but the entire trade along this river." The crowd stiffened. All eyes swung toward Malik, waiting. He stepped forward, his face unreadable. For a heartbeat, silence weighed heavy. Then Malik spoke, his tone cool but edged with steel. "You forget. I grew up on this dirt. I know the taste of hunger. I know the price of cruelty. When you bribed the market elder to steal the pier, you didn't just cheat men, you starved their families, and you mocked this old man's catch, making the whole village laugh at him. That is not power. That is rot. A murmur surged, rippling through the crowd like a sudden wind. Jalani's smirk faltered. His eyes darted, searching for allies among the villagers. But none stepped forward. Lies, he snapped, though the word rang hollow. Do you think they'll believe you? They already do, Malik answered simply. The villagers turned as one. Some nodded. Others murmured agreement. The market elder, who had once taken Jahlani's bribe, lowered his head, shame written in his furrowed brow. Before everyone, Jahlani's posture crumbled. He could not meet their eyes. His jaw clenched, but no rebuttal came. He stood exposed, the sheen of wealth stripped away to reveal only pettiness. Kwame watched it all, his chest trembling with each breath. He had never sought vindication, but the sight of justice blooming before him was almost too much to bear. His fingers dug into his knees as he tried to steady himself against the swell of feeling. The hammers resumed, the boat bobbed at the pier. The house took shape stronger than before. But the true rebuilding was not of wood and rope. It was of reputation, of dignity returned. As the sun bled into evening, painting the sky an amber fire, Kwame rose slowly from his stool. The villagers fell silent, parting to let him stand. His back was still bent, his steps unsteady, but his voice carried clear. I waited many nights alone, mocked and forgotten. I thought my kindness had drowned, but tonight I see it still floats. He turned toward Malik, his eyes wet, not because of my strength, but because memory never let it sink. The villagers bowed their heads. For once, the laughter of Marobi was gone, replaced by a solemn hush. The air seemed to hold its breath, listening to the river's low song. Malik placed a hand on the new frame of the house. This is only the beginning, he said. His words held promise, but also weight. The villagers shifted, eager yet uncertain. Sensing that change carried both gift and demand, Jalani slipped away into the dusk, his shadow shrinking as the torches lit, and in that fading light, Kwame sank back onto his stool, his chest aching not from sickness, but from the sheer flood of feeling. He pressed a hand to his ribs, eyes fixed on the new boat rocking gently against the pier. His breath came shallow, but steady. For the first time in years, he felt the stir of belonging rather than isolation. Yet even as warmth spread through him, a question throbbed deep. Now that his waiting had borne fruit, what would come next? And would this fragile honor hold against the currents of envy and time? The river gave no answer, only its endless whisper, carrying the question into the night. The drums of morning beat low and steady, a sound that carried across Marobi like the throb of the river itself. Smoke rose from clay pots where herbs smoldered, and the village gathered in silence, their eyes turned toward the house that once leaned tired against the wind. Now it stood upright, strong, rebuilt, but its master lay within, wrapped in white cloth. Kwame was gone. The lane that had once echoed with laughter at his expense now trembled under the hush of regret. Men who once mocked him carried the bier on their shoulders. Women trailed behind, baskets of flowers cradled in their arms. Children clutched each other's hands, their eyes wide with questions they could not speak. The procession wound its way toward the riverbank, where the earth smelled of wet clay and the water whispered without pause. Malik walked at the front, his head bowed, the silk bundle still in his grip. Inside, the dried fish rested, brittle yet whole. He had thought to return it, but Kwame had pressed it back into his hands with a final look that spoke louder than words. Keep it. Carry it forward. Malik's jaw was tight, but his eyes shone wet as he led the people to the place where kindness had once been mocked and now was mourned. At the river they lowered Kwame into the earth. No marble, no grand monument. Only soil, dark and soft, closing gently over him. The villagers stood in a ring, heads bent. For a long time no one moved. Then a small girl stepped forward, carrying something in her hands. It was a clay plate. On it lay a single fish, cooked with clumsy hands, the skin charred in places. She placed it at the foot of the fresh mound. A murmur rippled through the crowd. One by one, others followed. Children, then mothers, then fishermen who had once turned their backs. Plates appeared, each holding fish of different sizes, some meager, some fine, all placed carefully on the ground before Kwame's resting place. The dirt filled with the scent of salt and smoke, an offering not to the dead alone, but to the living memory of what he had begun. Malik unfolded the paper in his pocket. It was Kwame's hand, shaky but deliberate, his last words. He read aloud, his voice breaking. Do not carve my likeness in stone. Do not raise pillars in my name. If you wish to honor me, place a plate of fish at your door each evening, not for me, but for whoever might pass hungry, for whoever might carry tomorrow inside their ribs. The crowd listened, their throats thick, the river wind tugging at their clothes. When Malik lowered the paper, silence followed, heavy and sacred. The children were the first to move. They ran to their homes, returning with small plates, eager hands balancing them. The sight was clumsy, endearing. Fish too raw, some already nibbled, some nearly falling from the plates. They lined them along their thresholds, giggling through tears, proud to do what the old man had once done alone. The villagers watched, and in that moment, a new ritual took root. The twist came not in the morning, but in what the house became. At first, people thought it would be left a shrine, a place to whisper prayers. But Malik shook his head when the suggestion rose. He did not feed me to be worshipped, he said. He fed me so I would live. If his house stands, it will not be a temple. It will be a school. Confusion stirred, then curiosity. And so it was. The next season, benches were carried in. Nets were hung on the walls, not as trophies but as lessons. The children came, learning to read letters traced in sand, to count fish not just for trade but for memory. They learned stories of the river, of storms, of hunger, and of one man's plate left faithfully at the door. The house did not glow with incense or burn with candles. Instead, it filled with the chatter of children, the scrape of chalk, the laughter of discovery. On its threshold, a plate was still set each evening, never empty, always waiting. No one knew who might pass, but no one doubted it would matter. The villagers carved a single line into the wooden lintel above the door. Not his name, not dates of birth or death, but the words he had left them. Whoever shares fish nurtures destiny. Years later, when strangers came to Nairobi, they saw not a forgotten fishing town, but a place where children studied by lamplight, where no doorstep stood bare at dusk. They would ask why, and the villagers would tell them not of miracles, but of an old man who was once mocked for his foolishness, and of a boy who grew into a man carrying a dried fish, like a torch through the dark. As night fell on the day of Kwame's burial, the river lapped gently against the shore. not in rage but in calm. The plates lined the thresholds, their silver contents catching the last fire of the sunset. The villagers bowed their heads. Malik stood by the fresh grave, the silk bundle still in his hand. He unwrapped it, touched the dried fish once more, and pressed it back into the soil. He whispered low enough for only the earth to hear. "Rest. Your waiting is done. Now it is ours." The river seemed to answer with a sigh, the water glimmering faintly under the rising moon. The plates stood silent, glowing in the night like small beacons. And yet, as the village drifted toward sleep, one question lingered, carried in the hush of the water, whispered in the heart of every soul who had placed a plate on their threshold. When tomorrow comes, who will be the one to step forward, to keep waiting, to keep feeding the unseen? In the end, what lingers is not the weight of wealth or the echo of power, but the quiet memory of small acts that ripple far beyond their moment. A single gesture of kindness, easily dismissed by the world as foolish or insignificant, can become the seed of something enduring. When shared with an open heart, even the simplest offering, an extra plate, a word spoken gently, a door left ajar, may outlast storms and shadows, weaving itself into the very fabric of a community. Life is not measured only in victories or monuments, but in the unseen lives that are lifted because someone once refused to close their hand. Every kindness carries with it the possibility of becoming a bridge across loneliness, a light against cruelty, a memory that survives longer than stone. We often imagine that greatness comes with noise and spectacle, yet it is in the ordinary rhythms, the meals shared, the patience to wait, the choice to believe in another, that true legacy is born. And though time presses forward, erasing footprints and silencing voices, it can never erase the spirit of compassion once lived. To give without expecting return, to wait without bitterness, to honor the dignity of another even when no one else is watching. These are the things that outlast us. They are the gifts that, once passed, never stop moving, flowing onward like a river that carries every drop into the sea. So may we remember, every life holds the power to shape tomorrow through the gentleness of today. May we choose to offer our own plates of kindness, not because the world guarantees reward, but because the world is made whole only when we do. Thank you for walking through this story and for holding space for its echoes. If it stirred something in you, if it made you reflect, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you wish to journey further with us, please consider subscribing, so together we can keep telling stories that remind us of the strength of compassion, the endurance of memory, and the quiet beauty of lives lived with open hands.